if you are still reeling from that series finale, and I honestly think most of us still are, I need to tell you something that is going to make this whole goodbye hurt in a completely new way. Season 4 was never supposed to be the end. Showrunners Alexandra Clark and Heather Conkey had an entire 5th season mapped out, a real plan. And now that the show is over, they've started talking about exactly what we were going to get. So let's go through everything they've revealed, because I honestly think some of this is going to break your heart a little, especially once you remember everything we just watched happen in that finale itself. Every season of this show followed the same formula. Introduce a new era, then spend the following season actually living inside it. And according to Clark, season 5 was never going to throw us into a brand new timeline. It was going to dig all the way into the 1920s, the era we just barely scratched the surface of. With Susanna gone by that point in the timeline, the story would have shifted completely to the next generation. We would have actually watched Tessa get taken into the homestead. We would have seen the origin of who she became, instead of just inheriting the finished, complicated version of her we got in season 4. And I think this lands so much harder once you remember exactly how the finale actually left her. Tessa didn't die in that explosion. She staged the whole thing and disappeared, alive. And Elliot only barely begins to suspect that in the final stretch of the episode. We got the reveal that she survived. We never got the why. We never got to watch the choices that turned a frightened girl taken in after a tragedy into a woman capable of orchestrating her own disappearance and walking away from her own son. Season 5 was apparently going to be exactly that story. And honestly, knowing how much weight Tessa's absence carried across all 4 seasons, it almost feels unfair that the show spent that long building the mystery and then had to answer it in the same breath it was saying goodbye. And this is the part that genuinely stings the most for me. The creators wanted to explore Griffin and Tessa's relationship properly, not the version we got in fragments. The real thing, building all the way up to the jump itself, and then what life actually looked like the moment they landed on the other side of it. That's a whole love story we never got to see start. And it's the same era that apparently sent Jacob to 1820 in the finale, where he sat with ancestors like Thomas, Susanna, and a man named Elijah, just to find peace with his own guilt. We got the aftershock of that era. We never got the era itself. We got Jacob at a table with people he barely understood, instead of an entire season spent actually understanding them ourselves. There's more. We would have finally met younger versions of Fern, Cassandra, and Grayson, names that have been quietly tied to the White Witch lore since the very first season. Imagine Kat jumping back and accidentally running into all 3 of them as children, not knowing yet what any of them would grow up to mean to this family. And honestly, knowing now how Fern's story actually ended, losing Cliff in that explosion, getting one last 24 hours with him to tell him she was pregnant, raising that baby alone, a baby who we now know grows up to become Kat's own grandfather, makes me wish even more that we'd gotten to meet her as a little girl first. We met her as a devastated young woman in her worst moment. We never got to meet her before any of that happened to her. We never got to watch her become the woman who could stand in a kitchen in 1979 and warn a confused teenage Tessa that she would one day kill her own son, carrying that knowledge alone for decades before it ever came true. Now let's talk about the romances, because this show has always lived and died by them. Heather Conkey has openly said her biggest regret is not giving Jacob and Abigail more time. Yes, he got his happy ending. Yes, he got a child out of it. We even got the wedding right there at the pond, surrounded by the figments of everyone who shaped this family: Thomas, Susanna, Elijah, Fern, and Cliff, Evelyn, Colton, all of them standing there in spirit while Jacob and Abigail said their vows. But Conky is saying flat out that we barely got to watch that relationship actually breathe before the show handed us the ring, the proposal, and the vows all in one extended finale. We never even really got to sit with the fact that Casey, the mysterious intern who'd been quietly nudging this whole family together all season, turned out to be their own future child, using the Goodwin name specifically so nobody would realize they were actually a Landry. That reveal happened, got confirmed, and then the show was already over. Season 5 was going to show us the messy, real version of Jacob trying to build a family. Not just the highlight reel we got squeezed into a final season. And then there's Alice. Conky specifically called out expanding the Max and Alice story as a major priority for season 5. And if you remember how the finale actually left things, Alice finally admitted her real feelings for Max and then got on a plane to New York anyway, choosing herself first. That ending only works as a beautiful, bittersweet note if there's more story coming after it. As a final note for the whole series, it just sits there, unresolved, exactly the way Conky is now admitting it was never meant to. And I think it's worth mentioning Dell here too, because her ending is one of the most emotionally rich things this show ever did. And even that felt rushed once you know there was supposed to be more room for it. We finally got to watch her travel back to the summer of 1999 for one last dance with Colton, finally telling him she was sorry for never trusting him, finally hearing him say the words she'd needed for years. Please be happy. Be happy for me. 20 years of believing he might have betrayed her, resolved in a single conversation, and then almost immediately she's ready to move forward with Sam. That's an enormous emotional turn to compress into the back half of one finale. A real season 5 would have had room to actually show us what moving forward with Sam looks like instead of ending the moment she decides to try. And then the mysteries, because of course there were always going to be mysteries. The showrunners have basically asked fans to write the next chapter themselves at this point, and they've pointed to 2 specific lingering questions on purpose. Where did Kat and Alice actually jump to at the very end? Because remember, that's genuinely how the whole series closes. The 2 of them standing at the edge of that pond, hand in hand, Kat saying, "Every ending is a new beginning," and then they jump and the camera simply doesn't follow them. We were never supposed to know where they landed. And second, why does Thomas know the house is blue? Clark has teased that Thomas's connection to this whole timeline runs a lot deeper than anything we were shown. That is not a throwaway detail. That's a showrunner telling us there was an entire answer we never got, sitting right behind a man we already watched comfort Jacob in 1820 without ever learning what he actually knows. And finally, Sam. I think this is the one that's going to drive fans the craziest for the longest time, because we genuinely never got real confirmation of who he actually is. Was he connected to Thomas Coyle? Was there a deeper magical thread running through his presence in this story that simply got cut because the writers ran out of room? The finale did give him and Dell a real settled ending. That quiet scene where she tells him no more secrets, and he jokes about telling her everything he knows about the future, and she reminds him of the first rule of time: travel instead. We got the emotional ending. We never got the mythological one. Given how condensed that finale already was, just trying to give Del, Kat, and Alice a proper goodbye, I think it's safe to say Sam's bigger purpose in this family's history ended up on the cutting room floor, whether anyone wanted it there or not. Heather Conkey put it about as perfectly as anyone could. She said, "This whole series seemed to hit people in a very personal way. Who among us hasn't wished they had 5 more minutes? We didn't get those 5 more minutes with the Landry women on screen. But I honestly think the world they built is going to keep living in fan theories for a very long time. Exactly the way the showrunners clearly hoped it would. And given how much bigger this show's audience turned out to be on Netflix than it ever was on Hallmark Channel itself, I don't think it's unreasonable to hold on to a little hope that someone, somewhere, eventually picks up exactly where the season 5 plan was always supposed to begin." What was your favorite moment from this final season? And what do you actually think the real deal with Sam was? Drop it in the comments. If you're missing Port Haven as much as I am right now, hit that like button, subscribe, and send this to a fellow fan who needs a little closure today.